Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we slip into the sweat-stained sandals of a Roman surveyor named Lucius Vibenna, who's about to learn why you never trust a bureaucrat with an abacus. You're kneeling in a freshly dug trench outside Rome, the late summer sun baking your neck like a loaf of Ponies Militaris, fingers tracing grooves in a limestone block that's supposed to mark the Aqua Appia's starting elevation. Somewhere to your left, a donkey brays indignantly as workers unload yet another shipment of volcanic tuff, the Senate's cost-effective alternative to proper travertine. Behind you, Senator Appius Claudius Caecus's envoy mutters about deadlines, his sandals crunching gravel as he reviews your wax tablet calculations with the urgency of a man who's never hauled a bucket from the Tiber. This isn't just Rome's first aqueduct, it's a 16.4-kilometer gamble. The year is 312 BCE, and the city's population has outgrown its wells. Children scamper through forums clutching clay jars of murky river water that's equal parts HO and whatever the Etruscans dumped upstream last Tuesday. Your task? Carve a stone river through 8 hills, 3 vineyards, and a particularly vindictive olive grove owned by a patrician who still thinks indoor plumbing is a passing fad. The engineering principle is simple: water flows downhill. The execution? Let's just say you've already sacrificed 2 goats to Neptune and 1 to Cloacina, goddess of saws, just in case. Your lead mason, a grizzled companion named Spurius, spits into the trench. Slopes off by a thumb's width, he grumbles, squinting at the Chorobates, a 10-foot leveling tool that keeps getting mistaken for firewood by night shift crews. You check his claim using the official Roman foot standard, a bronze rod kept in the Temple of Jupiter, only to realize the local laborious measure in Pompeian feet, which apparently include toenails. One worker's stride counts his sandal's sole, another subtracts a digit loss to frostbite in the Samnite Wars. When you demand consistency, Spurious shrugs, the stones don't care about numbers. By midday, the envoy's patience evaporates faster than Tiber runoff in August. The senator wants water flowing by the Ides. He barks, jabbing at your plans. You explain, again, that a gradient steeper than 1:200, 1 foot drop per 200 horizontal, will erode the channel, while anything flatter lets sediment accumulate. He counteroffers with a scroll listing the Senate's new efficiency measures: half rations for surveyors, double shifts for slaves, and a revolutionary idea to let rainwater do the work. You briefly consider joining Carthage. As the sun dips, you catch 2 apprentices arguing over elevation markers. One insists on using the envoy's fancy dioptra, a precursor to the theodolite. The other swears by the amphora method, filling a jug with wine and marking where it drains. If it empties before my song ends, the slope's good, he slurs, belting out a drinking hymn. Nearby, a scribe transcribes measurements onto clay tablets, when he isn't scratching bets on which team of oxen will collapse first. Historians still argue whether the Aqua Appia's eventual 0.15% slope, a 1:667 gradient, was intentional genius or the result of a dysentery outbreak that left junior engineers in charge. What's certain? By mile 3, your carefully plotted route swerves to avoid a consul's vacation villa, adding 9 unnecessary bends. The final stretch near the Porta Trigemina tilts slightly uphill, solved by the innovative "let's pretend we meant that" approach and a strategic bribes to the water commissioner. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously, Appius Claudius didn't build aqueducts for altruism. He needed public support after bankrupting the state with his Via Appia project. The grind never changes. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Somewhere in the Alban Hills, a spring trickles toward your trench. A lizard scampers over limestone that'll outlive empires. And you, dear Lucius, are about to discover that eternal city plumbing involves equal parts geometry and groveling. The aqua Appia will eventually deliver 73,000 cubic meters of water daily, enough to supply 21st century Bruges, but tonight? Tonight, you're just praying the envoy doesn't notice your backup plan, a hidden sluice gate that dumps excess flow into the cloaca maxima. Because nothing says Roman engineering like redirecting crises to the nearest sewer. Section 2. The collapse happens at dawn on the Ides of September, right as the envoy's prized rooster announces the sun's arrival with a screech that could curdle milk. You're jolted awake by a rumble deeper than a senator's post-feast belch, a sound felt in the molars, not the ears. By the time you stumble to the site, the Aqua Appia's third-mile channel has folded in on itself like a drunk legionary's tent. Limestone blocks lie scattered like dice after a particularly unlucky roll, and what's left of the trench resembles a toddler's dig into a honeycake. A slave tugs your tunic, wide-eyed. The water, it bubbled before it fell. Senator Appius's envoy arrives on horseback, his face the color of overripe figures. You said 1:200, he accuses, brandishing a clay tablet that somehow survived the disaster. You crouch to examine the wreckage. The problem isn't the slope, it's the variability. One section drops a full Roman foot over 150 paces, thanks to Spurius's thumb math, while the next stretch is flatter than a Vestal Virgin's social calendar. The channel's spine fractured where the two met, unable to handle the hydraulic mood swing. Enter Frontinus, not the later water commissioner, but his equally prickly ancestor, a consultant from Etruria who sniffs the crumbled mortar and declares, "This isn't erosion. This is laziness." He points to the sediment, a spongy layer of leaf mulch and snail shells that clogged the flatter segment, creating a bacterial buffet. Stagnant water rot stone, he lectures, as if you hadn't spent last week scrubbing algae from the intake grate. Your gradient so gentle, turtles could sunbathe in it. The workers murmur about omens. One claims he saw Juno's sacred geese waddling through the trench the night before. Another swears the mortar mix contained cheap Egyptian ash instead of proper pozzolana. You're too busy calculating the financial and existential cost of this disaster. The Senate's already docked your pay to cover the reparations, which, knowing Roman bureaucracy, means a new villa for Appius's mistress. Your salvation arrives in the form of a piss-filled amphora. Watch this, Spurius says, hauling the clay vessel to an intact section of channel. He appends it, releasing a steaming arc that slices through the morning mist. The urine races down the slope, hits a pebble, and sprays sideways onto the envoy's pristine white toga. See? Too steep, the mason cackles. Your piss flows like the Tiber in flood. Frontinus isn't amused. He whips out his libella, a bronze leveling tool, and measures the slope, 1.2 degrees. This isn't a cloaca, he snaps. Aqueducts require precision, not liquid guesswork. The word guesswork echoes across the worksite, carried by the same breeze that's now flapping the envoy's urine damp hem. You propose a compromise, tear out the collapsed section and rebuild it with a 1:300 gradient, a compromise between flow speed and stability. The envoy vetoes this, citing the senator's decree that Rome's aqueduct shall outslope her enemy's ambitions. A phrase he almost certainly stole from a third-rate tragic play. As the debate rages, a junior engineer named Marcus timidly suggests using animal fat to test slopes. "Grease a sheep's femur, send it down the channel," he mumbles. "If it stops, we're too flat. If it vanishes, too steep." The crew loves this idea, mostly because it involves barbecuing the test subjects afterward. Frontinus storms off, vowing to write a strongly worded treatise. By dusk, you're overseeing the slope recalibration using Marcus's femur method. 10 sheep bones later, you've determined that 1:250 keeps the grease moving without launching entrails into bystanders. The envoy, now wearing a borrowed tunic 3 sizes too small, mutters about innovative metrics and senatorial discretion. You don't care. The bones work. Historians still argue whether the Aqua Appia's collapses stemmed from poor gradients or the Republic's infamous lime mortar, a mix so crumbly, Pliny the Elder later called it the baker's mistake. But here, in the trenches, you learn the real truth. Roman engineering is 10% geometry, 40% bribes, and 50% praying to the right god. As you pack up, Marcus shyly hands you a scroll. It's a poem comparing aqueduct slopes to Venus's hips with a postscript asking for a raise. You file it under Problems for Future Lucius and head to the nearest tavern. The wine is sour, the bread harder than Trajan's column, but at least the floor slopes perfectly toward the drain. Section 3. The year is 290 BCE, and you're hunched over a wobbly cedar table in a dimly lit taberna near the Campus Martius, squinting at a clay tablet that could either revolutionize Roman hydraulics or end your career. The air reeks of fermented fish sauce and the existential dread of engineers who've just realized their life's work hinges on a difference thinner than a denarius. Across from you, your colleague Numerius Flavius, a man whose beard seems to bristle with perpetual indignation, stabs a finger at the tablet's surface. 0.1 degrees, he hisses. That's all that separates genius from garbage. The tablet in question is a casualty report from the Aqua Annio's latest mishap, a section near Tiber that cracked like an eggshell, spilling enough water to drown a legion's worth of cabbages. Your team's calculations show a 0.95 degree slope. Flavius insists it's 1.05. The discrepancy? Roughly the height of a mouse's whisker over a mile. But in Rome's newly formed water commission, even a flea's leap is grounds for a Senate inquiry. You measured with this. Flavius snorts, flicking the bronze grommer on the table, a cross-shaped surveying tool that's been your loyal companion since the Aqua Appia days. Its plumb lines sway accusingly. The grommer's margin of error is 0.2 degrees. You might as well use a blindfolded toddler with a protractor. You counter that his beloved Chorobates, that 10-foot leveling monstrosity, requires a flat terrain and 8 sober men to carry it, which, in your experience, is rarer than a modest senator. The argument spills into the street, drawing a crowd of off-duty legionaries and a particularly judgmental goose. Flavius brandishes a wax tablet crammed with calculations proving that a 0.1 degree steeper slope would have prevented the Tiber disaster. You retaliate with a fistful of gravel, demonstrating how even the tiniest pebble can divert a water channel's flow. Gravel isn't math, he roars as the goose steals his stylus. Here's the rub, Rome's aqueduct standards still don't exist. Every engineer eyeballs gradients based on their favorite philosopher's musings. Followers of Archimedes argue for hyper-precision, Stoics shrug and say, the water knows its path. The Senate, meanwhile, demands progress reports in units they understand, usually wine amphorae per hour. Your breakthrough comes at midnight, fueled by stolen temple incense and a jug of Campanian wine so rough it could scour marble. You're comparing the clay tablet's cuneiform to a map of the Annio's route when you spot it, a smudged numeral in the elevation log. Some scribe's quill slipped, turning a V into a 6. That single stroke exaggerated the slope by, yes, 0.1 degrees. The Tiber collapse wasn't due to gradient at all, but a clerical error, and possibly a hungry scribe snacking on honeyed dates mid-transcription. Flavius refuses to believe it. The numbers don't lie, he thunders, even as you press the original soil samples into his hands. The sediment tells the truth. Layers of silt from a recent flood, not erosion. The Annio didn't fail because of slope, it failed because the Sabines upstream redirected a tributary to irrigate their new lettuce farms. But try explaining agrarian sabotage to a commissioner who's staked his reputation on angle pedantry. The debate escalates to the Senate floor, where two factions emerge, the mensors rigoris, sticklers for precision, and the aqua voluntas, water will find a way. The former demands standardized inclines policed by state-approved grommer inspectors, the latter propose letting nature decide, with annual sacrifices to Fons, god of springs. A junior senator from Sicilia suggests outsourcing slope math to Egyptian mathematicians, which triggers a fistfight over cultural purity. You settle the matter with a gamble. Borrowing a trick from Marcus's FEMA method, you pour wine along a scaled model of the Anios slope, 0.95 degrees on your side, 1.05 on Flavius's. The crowd leans in. Your wine glides smoothly, his overflows the channel, drenching a praetor's new silk tunica. The Senate erupts in applause. Flavius mutters about viscosity differences between wine and water, but it's too late, you've just invented the world's first fluid dynamics demo. Victory is short-lived. The next morning, a fresh clay tablet arrives. The Water Commission's new decree: all gradients must now be calculated to 2 decimal points. Because nothing solves bureaucratic chaos like exponentially more bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether the 0.1 degree controversy delayed Rome's aqueduct network by decades or prevented 10 Tiberscale disasters. The truth? It didn't matter. Within a month, a rogue engineer in Capua bypassed the whole debate by building a pressurized lead pipe, slope optional. But that's a scandal for another century and another sleepless night. As you stumble home, dawn painting the geniculum in hues of regret, you pass a street vendor selling clay replicas of the infamous 0.1 degree tablet. The vendor winces. Rough night, Aquarius. You drop a cestus into his palm. Just pour the wine, you sigh, and make sure it's perfectly level. Section 4. The year is 273 BCE, and you're face to face with the most temperamental piece of carpentry in the Mediterranean, the Chorobates. Imagine a wooden giraffe with a drinking problem, 10 feet of oak planks bolted into an A-frame, water channels carved into its upper beam, and 4 plumb lines dangling beneath like a drunkard's eyelashes. It's the closest thing Rome has to a precision instrument, provided the ground is flatter than a vestal's pillow and the crew hasn't used it as a bench during lunch breaks. Hold it steady. You bark as 2 laborers sway under the Chorobates' weight, their breath reeking of yesterday's garum and cheap posca. The tool's name literally means time waster in Greek, and for good reason. To measure a slope, you fill its channels with water and adjust the legs until the liquid sits evenly. Simple, unless your assistants are arguing about chariot races or a stray goat keeps licking the channels dry. Today's mission: calibrate the aqua Anios slope across a stretch of marshland so soggy, even the frogs wear tiny sandals. The Water Commission has decreed a 0.48 degree incline here, a number so specific, you suspect a clerk just divided his age by his shoe size. You've already spent 3 hours watching the Chorobates water slosh left, then right, then left again, like Neptune himself can't decide on Rome's plumbing future. Enter Vitruvius, not the famed architect, but his great-great-grandfather, a sour-faced engineer who's just published De Aqueductibus, a scroll so dense it doubles as a doorstop. He inspects your Chorobates and sneers. Water's unreliable, he declares. Evaporates. Freezes. Gets drunk by idiots. He whips out his libella, a bronze level the size of a dagger, and slaps it on the beam. This is the future. Your crew disagrees. They've grown fond of the Chorobates, especially after discovering its water channels perfectly fit wine amphorae. Last week, they rigged a drinking game where whoever spills while carrying it buys the next round. Result: 7 broken toes and a surveyor's map that accidentally routed an aqueduct through a brothel. As Vitruvius pontificates, a legionary-turned labor named Magnus lurches into the Chorobates, sending plumb lines swinging like festival pendulums. Whoops, he slurs, steadying himself on the beam. Thought it was a triumphal arch. The water channels slop over, drenching Vitruvius's sandals. You later learn Magnus celebrated his discharge with a 3-day bender featuring Libyan date wine and a misguided attempt to survey the stars. The Chorobates' true nemesis, though, isn't human, it's nature. A breeze stiff enough to flutter a toga can skew measurements. Ants colonize the legs. And don't get started on the libella versus chorobates rivalry. Purists swear by the chorobates' accuracy. Pragmatists argue that if you need 8 men and a sacrificial goat to operate a tool, maybe your engineering priorities are skewed. Your breakthrough comes at midnight, thanks to a disgruntled beekeeper whose hives lie in the aqueduct's path. He's lobbed 3 honeycombs at your crew this week, but tonight, he brings a gift, a clay jar of mead. Make it quick, he grumbles. As the crew drinks, someone jests that the chorobate's legs should be weighted with lead. Like a ship's anchor, slurs Magnus, now wearing the chorobates as a hat. Lightning strikes. You raid the supply cart for lead ingots meant for pipes, lash them to the chorobate's legs, and, mirabile dictu, the damn thing stabilizes. Next morning, Vitruvius returns to find you measuring slopes with a tool that no longer doubles as a drunk tank. HMH, he sniffs, secretly jotting notes. His great-great-grandson will later claim credit for the innovation in der Architectura. Historians still argue whether the chorobates was widely used or just a Vitruvian fantasy. But in the marshlands of Latium, it's the hero Rome doesn't deserve. By sunset, you've plotted a 0.5-degree slope, close enough for state work, and Magnus has sobered up enough to apologize to the beekeeper with a stolen honeycomb. As you pack up, Vitruvius sidles over. Lead waits, he murmurs. Brilliant. But why not use 2 libelas? You hand him a cup of mead. Drink this, you sigh, and tell me how many libelas it takes to steady your sandals. The chorobates leaves a legacy. 200 years later, Ostian engineers will find one rusting in a field, its channels petrified with lime, its legs hosting a thriving colony of termites. They'll shrug, kick it, and build their aqueduct 0.2 degrees steeper, because progress, in Rome, is just stubbornness with better PR. Section 5. You're knee-deep in papyrus scrolls, your office lit by a single oil lamp that's more smoke than flame. When it hits you, Roman bureaucracy moves at the speed of a constipated snail. The year is 269 BCE, and the Annio Vetus Aqueduct, Rome's second attempt at hydraulic greatness, is stalled not by collapsing trenches or slope squabbles, but by a missing comma. Or rather, a misplaced unsure mark in a scribe's ledger that's just turned a 0.6-degree slope into a 6.0-degree death slide. The culprit? A junior scribe named Librarius Eratum, yes, his parents knew, whose hands shake not from age but from a lifelong fear of geese. He's hunched over a wax tablet now, stylus quivering as he transcribes the Senate's latest decree. All aqueduct measurements shall be verified thrice, lest the gods smite us with incompetence. Too late. 3 weeks ago, Librarius misread his own handwriting, a mix of cursive and chicken scratch, and recorded the Annio Vetus's critical slope as 6 unsai per c passus instead of 6 per m. The masons, ever eager to please, built a section steeper than Vesuvius's grin. You discover the error during a routine audit, tripping over a scroll pile and landing face-to-face with Librarius's ledger. The numbers dance in the lamplight. 6 unsai per 100 paces? That's a cliff, not a channel. Librarius pales, mumbles something about bad ink, and faints into a basket of reed pens. The fallout is swift. That rogue slope directs a torrent of water straight into Senator Quintus's seaside villa, transforming his prized mosaic of Neptune into a soggy jigsaw puzzle. His wife's peacocks, now aquatic fowl, float indignantly in the atrium. Quintus storms the water commission, toga dripping, demanding compensation in gold or blood. The commission's response? A 12-foot scroll of liability disclaimers written in size 2 script. Enter Rome's first infrastructure lawsuit, Senatus versus Aqua Annio Engineers et al. The trial is held in the Forum, where the plaintiff's lawyer, a man with a voice like a rusty hinge, accuses your team of hydraulic hubris and attacking Neptune's divine domain. The defense? A sleep-deprived jurist named Marcus Legalis, who argues that Librarius's error was an act of the fates and thus tax-deductible. The proceedings are a circus. Witnesses include a mason who swears he followed the plans except when the oxen looked tired, and a haruspex who reads goat entrails and declares, "The liver says Slop." Quintus's peacocks wander in, squawking their testimony. The judge, Praetor Lucius Verres, naps openly until his scribe pokes him with a stylus for verdicts. You're summoned to testify. The crowd heckles as you explain gradient math using a stolen Chorobates leg as a pointer. See this notch? That's 0.6 degrees. Now imagine 10 times steeper, a tomato splats against your tunic. Barbarian math, someone yells. Vez fines them for littering. The trial's turning point comes when Librarius, still twitching from goose-related trauma, confesses he used squid ink that day. The usual octopus ink was out of stock, he wails. Squid smudges. Historians still argue whether this was a legitimate defense or just a really bad seafood pun. In the end, Verres rules in favor of the Senate, but only because Quintus's cousin bribed him with a Gaulish chariot. The penalty? A year's wages docked from everyone involved, including the peacocks. Librarius is sentenced to transcribe Virgil's Aeneid backward on sheepskin, a task so cruel, he flees to become a shepherd in the Alps. As for the Annio Vetus? The slope is corrected using a team of sober Etruscan surveyors and a libella blessed by the Temple of Vesta. But the bureaucratic scars remain. The Water Commission mandates triple-checking all scrolls, a process so sluggish, the next aqueduct's plans won't be ratified until Carthage falls. You leave the forum at dusk, the scent of ink and irony clinging to your tunic. A street vendor hawks Librarius's folly clay tablets, misprinted slopes included. You buy one as a paperweight. Nearby, a lawyer argues with a stray goose over a dropped cestus. Somewhere, Neptune chuckles. Section 6. The truth hits you like a poorly balanced grommer to the skull. Rome's greatest engineering marvel is held together by lies, sandals, and a foot that changes size more often than a politician's promises. You're in the Temple of Jupiter's archives, elbow deep in scrolls that reek of sheepskin and regret, when you find it, the Aqua Appia's original survey ledger. The numbers shimmer in the lamplight, columns of neat unsai and peders that, at first glance, suggest divine precision. Then you notice the asterisk. Measurements taken per surveyor's foot, adjusted for feast day swelling. You choke on your own spit. Feast day swelling. Of course. The Aqua Appia's entire slope, the gradient that's supposed to sustain Rome's thirst for centuries, was calculated using a unit of measurement as reliable as a Vestal's poker face. One engineer's foot was a meaty size 12, another's a dainty 7, and nobody thought to mention it until entire sections of the aqueduct started either hoarding puddles like misers or vomiting water like overzealous fountains. Let's break it down. The Roman foot, pes, is supposed to be 11.65 inches. But in 312 BCE, standardization is a myth whispered by Greek pedants. In reality, every foreman's foot becomes the holy ruler. Bigas Tosus, the lead surveyor for the Appia's eastern stretch, had feet like bread loaves after a lifetime of stomping grapes. His pes? A sprawling 13 inches. Meanwhile, tiny Tertius Cursor, handling the western slopes, lost 3 toes to a Gallic frostbite incident. His foot barely clocks 9 inches. The result? A channel that drops sharply in the east, flooding olive groves, and plateaus in the west, creating Rome's first mosquito sanctuary. You confront Appius Claudius's successor, a man whose nose is so upturned, he could drown in a drizzle. The Aqua Appia's slope is a joke, you hiss, unfurling a map dotted with conflicting pedes symbols. He sniffs. We used the senatorial standard foot. You produce said standard, a bronze rod stored under the temple of Jupiter, and a volunteer from the stonemasons guild. The mason's bare foot, still caked in mortar, overshoots the rod by 2 thumbwidths. The senatorial successor shrugs. So he's blessed by the gods. Builds character. The fix? Resurvey the entire aqueduct using actual standards. But that means rehiring crews, recarving milestones, and explaining to landowners why their waterfront vineyards are now bone dry. The Senate solution: a midnight decree declaring all existing PEDs valid within their respective municipalities. You're handed a scroll titled Edict on Variable Feet and a jug of wine that tastes like defeat. Enter Rufus, a Numidian slave-turned-engineer with a knack for geometry and sarcasm. He's been chiseling correction marks into the aqueduct sides, muttering in Punic. In Carthage, he says, sawing a replacement limestone block, we measure with cubits. You know why? Because elbows don't swell after Saturnalia. You laugh, then realize he's serious. The comedy peaks at the Milvian Bridge, where 2 crews meet. The eastern team, using Bygas's legacy foot, has dug a trench deep enough to hide an elephant. The western team, adhering to Tertius's toe-less standard, arrives with a shallower cut. The mismatch leaves a 3-foot step in the channel, a waterfall that's less engineering marvel and more tourist attraction for confused ducks. Historians still argue whether the inconsistent pairs was a deliberate choice to employ local labors, they built what they understood, or the result of a culture that prioritized speed over accuracy, typical Roman hubris. The truth? It was both. The Aqua Appia delivered water, yes, but it also delivered a masterclass in compromise, a stone-cold lesson that sometimes good enough is the empire's motto. As you recalibrate the Milvian gap with a jury-rigged pulley system, Rufus carves a tiny foot icon into the keystone. For posterity, he smirks. You half expect future scholars to interpret it as a religious symbol. Spoiler, they will. By sundown, the aqueduct flows, unevenly, temperamentally, but it flows. A senator's wife complains her fountain now has the vigor of a 3-legged horse, but the public baths are full, and that's all that matters. As you walk the route, your own feet aching in their sandals, you spot a child playing with a clay replica of the Aqua Appia. His chubby fingers mismatch the blocks, tilting the channel wildly. You smile. Rome endures not through perfection, but through stubborn, lopsided momentum. Section 7. The Roman Senate smells like a conspiracy tonight. Incense thick enough to choke a minotaur, sweat pooling under wool togas, and the metallic tang of ambition sharp enough to flay skin. You're wedged between a snoring praetor and a junior senator doodling obscene galleys on his wax tablet, watching Cato the Elder stomp toward the rostra like Jupiter mid-thunderbolt. His voice booms before he reaches the podium, slopes. The word ricochets off marble columns, startling a nest of sparrows into flight. You'd think Carthage itself was scaling the Capitoline, the way these Aquarius fools weep over angles. The chamber stirs. Engineers clustered near the doors, calloused hands clutching Chorobates schematics, tense like hounds scenting a wolf. Cato's here to eviscerate the slope pedants begging for standardized gradients, and is armed with all the rhetorical subtlety of a battering ram. In my day, he thunders, slapping the podium so hard a stylus leaps to its death, we dug trenches where the gods willed them. No whining over 0.1 degrees, or hydrodynamic whatever the hades. A philosopher in the front row nods sagely, muttering about Aristotle's Naturales Questiones, until Cato wheels on him. And you, with your Greek angles and Persian trigonometry. Next you'll want baths that don't stink of sulfur. You know the truth, though. Last night, while skulking past Cato's villa to return a borrowed plumb line, you saw him, through a half-shuttered window, hunched over scrolls by lamplight. not treaties or tax codes, but hydraulic schematics. Greek ones. Diagrams of Archimedes' screws and sluice gates, margins crammed with notes in his jagged hand. Now, watching him rail against the very math he's studying, you realize Rome's most vocal traditionalist is a fraud in a toga. The slope pedants try to counter. A hydraulics engineer named Gallus rises, unrolling a map of the aqua marsh's proposed route. Without precision, the gradient will. Cato drowns him out with a theatrical sneeze. Gradient this! He yanks an apple from his toga, bites it, and hurls the core at Gallus. Eat better, think clearer. The Senate erupts, half in laughter, half in horror. Historians still argue whether Cato's anti-intellectualism was genuine or a performance to cement his man of the people brand. The truth? Both. He's the original troll, decrying Greek influence while hoarding their manuals like a dragon with a library card. You spot a corner of Heron of Alexandria's Pneumatica peeking from his toga folds. It's the intellectual equivalent of hiding a wine jug in a salad bowl. The debate spirals. Philosophers argue that water seeks its natural level, so why fight nature? Engineers fire back that nature didn't have to supply a city of 200,000. Someone quotes Plato's Timaeus, someone else throws a figure. Cato, sensing momentum, launches into his favorite rant, Carthago delenda est. Because nothing unites Romans like imagining their enemy's annihilation. The engineers slump. Slope standards, it seems, are as doomed as Carthage. But then, fate intervenes. As Cato pivots to mock a pointless proposal for gradient inscriptions, a scroll slips from his toga. It unfurls down the Senate steps, revealing detailed calculations for a 0.3-degree slope in Greek. The chamber gasps. A scribe lunges for it, but Gallus is faster. He snatches the scroll, eyes widening. Senator, he pairs, since when do you draft aqueduct specs in Alexandria's tongue? Cato freezes. For a heartbeat, the Senate holds its breath. Then he explodes. A forgery! Greek trickery! That's not my irk. Another scroll plops from his toga. Then another. Soon, the floor's littered with hydraulic treatises like leaves after a storm. The engineers gawk. The philosophers facepalm. The junior senator's doodle now features Cato riding a Chorobates into Carthage. The scandal burns through Rome faster than a Vestal's shame. By dusk, graffiti near the Circus Maximus depicts Cato as a Janus-faced hydra, one head barking Roman virtue, while the other whispers past, what's the cosine of 0.3? Yet the real twist isn't his hypocrisy, it's the outcome. Shamed into silence, Cato stops blocking the slope reforms. The Water Commission quietly adopts a 0.25-degree standard for urban aqueducts, a compromise between Greek math and Roman pragmatism. As you leave the Curia, a street vendor offers Cato's secret scroll pastries, flaky dough stuffed with honey and shredded papyrus. You bite into one, gag on parchment, and spot Cato himself storming past, trailed by a slave clutching, yes, a shiny new dioptra. For confiscation, the slave lies, poorly. Historians still debate whether Cato's clandestine studies were patriotic, master the enemy's tools, or personal, a late-life crisis in toga form. But in the end, Rome gets its slopes, Carthage gets its ashes, and every engineer learns the real art of politics. Hide your Greek homework. Section 8. The air in Pompeii smells like rebellion and sulfur. Your Vibius Atrius, provincial engineer and certified thorn in the Water Commission side, knee-deep in a trench that's technically illegal. Above you, Vesuvius looms like a petulant child holding its breath, sprinkling ash onto your tunic as if the mountain itself is invested in your little project. Steeper, you mutter, shoveling another load of pulvis putillanus, that magical volcanic grit, into your mortar mix. The Roman standards can rot in Hades. You've got a point to prove. It's 62 CE, a decade before Vesuvius goes full tantrum, and Pompeii's aqueduct is a joke. The official slope, 0.15 degrees, as dictated by some pampered bureaucrat in Rome, means water arrives slower than a senator's apology. Your solution? A cheeky 0.3 degree gradient, courtesy of Pompeii's backyard volcano. The ash makes concrete so strong, you could vault a bull over it. Sure, the commission scrolls say slopes shall not exceed 0.2 degrees without Senate approval, but you've met the Senate. They once debated whether eggs should be boiled for 3 minutes or 5 while Ostia burned. Your crew, a ragtag mix of freedmen and one ex-gladiator who measures angles by squinting, is all in. Flows better than a patrician's wine fountain, laughs Marcus, your mortar mixer, as water zips through the new channel. The locals agree. Fishmongers cheer as their stalls flood, with water, not sarcasm, and the bathhouse owner names a sauna after you. Even the town's stray dogs seem impressed, lapping from troughs that once doubled as dust bowls. Then the commission's inspector arrives. His name's Aulus Declerius, or so you call him, a man whose personality mirrors his perfectly leveled libella. He takes one look at your slope and has a meltdown smoother than Roman glass. This is double the regulation, he screeches, waving a scroll so old, it might have been drafted by Romulus. You counter with a taste test. Drink that, you say, pointing to the old channel sludge. He does. One gag later, he's reconsidering his life choices. But bureaucracy is a hydra. Aulus fires off a missive to Rome, citing reckless hydrological conduct and unauthorized use of combustible mountain cheese, he meant the ash. Meanwhile, you're busy being a local hero, until the springs run dry. It happens slowly. First, the bathhouse's caldarium goes tepid. Then the fishmonger's buckets come up empty. By the time the town's sacred fountain starts coughing like a cat with a hairball, you're elbow deep in the intake basin, praying to every aqueduct god you've ever mocked. The problem? Your glorious slope didn't just speed up the water, it vacuumed the source spring like a drunk at a symposium. Turns out, Vesuvius's ash makes too good a seal. The water can't seep back underground to replenish, it's all rush and no return. The mob forms at dawn. Water thief, yells the bathhouse owner, now charging double for precious sweat retention. Even the dogs snub you. Aulus returns, smug as a cat in a pigeon coop, with a decree: dismantle the slope, restore the spring, and maybe we won't feed you to the eels. Your trial is held in the forum, between a linen merchant hawking dry season tunics and a street mime reenacting your hubris. The magistrate, a retired admiral who thinks aqueducts are little boat roads, naps through your defense. You argue that the spring's demise was act of God stuff, technically true, given Vesuvius's role. The prosecution counters with a jar of dusty sediment labeled Exhibit A, Vibius's legacy. In the end, you'll find 500 sesterces and sentenced to rebuild the slope at 0.1 degrees. For humility, Aulus smirks. But as you chip away at your own masterpiece, you leave a little graffiti inside the channel: Vibius fecit, maius quam Roma. Vibius built this, bigger than Rome. Let future archaeologists sort it out. Historians still argue whether your slope was visionary or vainglorious. Some say you pioneered sustainable concrete, others insist you'd have drained the Nile. The truth? You'll never tell. But when Vesuvius blows in 79 C, your channel survives, bone dry and smug, while Aulus's regulation aqueducts crumble into tourist souvenirs. As the sun sets, you spit into the trench where your legacy lies buried. A street vendor offers you a figure. Tough break, he says. You bite into the fruit, sweet and defiant, and shrug. Water under the bridge. Section 9. Rome's Forum Boreum has seen bull sacrifices, chariot auctions, and at one time Nero tried to auction off his childhood lyre. But today? Today it hosts the fraction wars, a showdown so petty, even the pigeons pause their crumb raids to gawk. On your left, the digiti puri, pure fingers, traditionalists who measure slopes by lowering one fingertip per 100 paces. On your right, the semis digiti, half-finger radicals, rebels demanding 1.5 fingers for faster flow. Between them, a scale model of the Aqua Claudius slope, carved from cheese. Because nothing says engineering debate like dairy-based hydraulics. One finger, one pace, as the gods intended. Roars Gaius Vetus, Puri leader and human sundial, his nose casts a shadow you could set clocks by. He slams a bronze unsure rod, engraved with his great-grandfather's thumbprint, onto the table. The radicals retort? A chorus of fart noises orchestrated via armpit. Their leader, a red-faced Gaul named Brennus the barely Roman, hoists a radish carved into a 1.5-finger mold. Your gods want baths or ponds? The conflict boils down to fractions. The Puri method, 1:200 slope, 1 finger drop per 100 paces, guarantees steady flow, they claim. The radicals' 1.5 to 200 ratio promises speed, but risks erosion. You've been hired to mediate, a decision you regret by the third wine-soaked insult. To demonstrate, Gaius pours water down his cheese slope. It meanders like a tipsy tortoise. Brennus snorts, adds a dollop of honey to simulate 1.5 fingers, and sends his cascade roaring through. The cheese channel disintegrates on contact. Too fast. Gaius crows, as lactose lava oozes toward a senator's sandals. The crowd's divided. Bakers side with the Puri, slow water means steady mill wheels. Laundrymen cheer the radicals, faster flow equals cleaner tunics. A popcorn vendor circulates, shouting, place bets. Will it be fingers or fractions? Historians still argue whether the 1:200 standard was based on science or the average Roman finger width. Spoiler, it's both. But here, in the dairy-doomed forum, the debate escalates. Brennus unveils a live demo, 2 aqueduct models, one Puri-approved, the other radical-ramped, each channeling the Tiber's filth. The Puri flow clogs with reeds, the radical's torrent sweeps away a miniature temple. See! Brennus bellows. Power cleans. Gaius retaliates with a scroll of disaster predictions, all radical-built aqueducts allegedly doomed to collapse. Brennus fires back that Puri channels are so slow, algae grows beards. You're drafting a compromise when a radical engineer lobs a turnip at Gaius's head. The Puri respond with a salvo of chickpeas. The crowd joins in. Soon, the forum's a vegetable war zone, the cheese slope reduced to fondant. The Senate's verdict? A decree so Roman, it hurts. Both slopes are approved, for different classes. Patrician districts get radical speeds, plebeian neighborhoods, Puri trickles. Equity, declares the praetor, ducking a cabbage. But the real twist comes at dusk. As crews dismantle the dairy disaster, a slave named Felix, silent all day, scrawls a note in the mud. Why not 1.25? You stare at it. The perfect compromise. Too late. The edicts carved in stone, the factions already planning their next fracas. Tomorrow's topic, lead pipes versus terracotta, place your bets. Felix shrugs and goes back to scrubbing honey off marble. That night, graffiti appears across Rome, a giant finger with 1.5 knuckles. The Puri call it sacrilege, the radicals, art. You sip Posca at a tavern, listening to engineers argue over olive pits. Split the difference, one suggests. His friend chokes. Split a finger? Barbarian. As you leave, a street vendor sells fraction war finger puppets, Puri white, radical red. You buy a pair, make them kiss, and toss them into a fountain. The water, flowing at a state-approved 1:200, carries them slowly toward the cloaca maxima. Section 10. You're 3 days into a no-sleep bender, your eyes so bloodshot they could double for Mars in a planetary lineup, when poetry murders a vineyard. Let's backtrack. You're Marcus, apprentice to Rome's most meticulous aqueduct engineer, and your job is to transcribe slope calculations from wax tablet to papyrus. Simple, except your mentor, crusty old Sextus, writes in a hand that's equal parts cursive and chicken entrails. Last night, he tossed you a scroll with a wink. Special project, he rasped. Needs artistic flair. You assumed it was code for use red ink. It was not. The scroll, smelling faintly of rose oil, is a love poem from Sextus's secret admirer, a widow in Ostia who's really into hydraulics. Your slopes are the curves of Venus, it purrs. One part dropped to 200 of passion's stride, but in your caffeine-deprived delirium, you mistake this for a technical brief. By dawn, you've translated every amorous metaphor into geometry. The widow's eyes, deep as cisterns, become reservoir depth specks. Her hair flowing like the aqua morphs into a 0.25-degree gradient. And the kicker, let our love be as eternal as the Claudian arches, get scribbled as reinforce all junctions with volcanic tuff. The disaster unfolds at the Annio Novus construction site. You present your revised plans to the crew, who are too busy arm wrestling over lunch rations to notice the calculations are basically sonnets. The stonemasons, ever literal, carve Venus's curves into the channel's sides. The surveyors lay out a slope of 1:200 passion's stride, which they interpret as 1.5 fingers per 100 paces, because love, like aqueducts, requires oomph. By noon, water gushes into a patrician's vineyard at a rate that would impress Neptune. The owner, one Lucius Vitus, is midnap when his prized Falernian grapes become Atlantis, the sparkling edition. He sprints outside, tunic flapping, to find workers rafting on wine barrels and a very confused goat floating past on a door. "My vines," he wails, as 3,000 amphorae worth of HO, about 78,000 liters, transforms his terroir into a swamp. The aftermath is peak Roman bureaucracy. Lucius drags you to the forum, where a magistrate with a grudge against rhyme schemes fines you 1,000 sesterces for poetic engineering. Your defense, but love is a many-sloped thing, earns you an extra week of latrine duty. Sextus, torn between fury and pride, grumbles, "At least someone's reading my mail." Historians still argue whether this incident reflects widespread literacy issues or a secret tradition of hydraulic courtship. The quirky twist? The poem's author, the widow Antistia, is so charmed by your accidental fusion of romance and engineering, she sends you a follow-up ode and a marriage proposal. "Your mind," she writes, "is a labyrinth as complex as the cloaca maxima." You decline, but frame the scroll as a warning. Meanwhile, the vineyard becomes a tourist hotspot. Locals pay to float through the wreckage, sipping waterlogged wine and composing bad epigrams. Lucius, ever the entrepreneur, rebrands his estate as Villa Diluvium and charges extra for authentic Roman hydration experiences. As you scrub graffiti off the Aqua Claudia's arches, your masterpiece of shame reads Marcus Applied Materials Aqua. A fellow apprentice whispers, "How do you even think loins aflame meant increased water pressure?" You toss your sponge into a puddle. Poetry's just math with more crying. The legacy? Rome's first and last lyrical engineering standard. A decade later, Frontinus's De Aquis will warn against metaphorical measures, citing your debacle. But in taverns from Hispania to Syria, engineers still toast to your name, sliding love poems under colleagues' doors just to watch them sweat. As the moon rises, you spot Sextus reading Antistia's latest verse by lamplight. He chuckles, scribbles a note, and tucks it into his toolkit. You don't ask. Some slopes are better left unmeasured. Section 11. Midnight in the Cloaca Maxima smells like betrayal, eggs, and a hint of existential despair. You're knee-deep in Rome's greatest sore, a labyrinth of brick arches and regrets, listening to the aqua engineer's worst nightmare, laughter. Not the jovial kind, but the wet, gurgling cackle of men who've spent too long breathing methane. They'll never suspect, grins your foreman, spurious, his face lit by a flickering oil lamp. One tug here, and bam, the aqua appia becomes our flush. Let's rewind. While aqueduct engineers hog glory and Senate funding, you and your crew are the cloaca's unsung janitors, unclogging everything from rotten figs to the occasional lost senator. But tonight, you're done playing second fiddle to fancy-pants hydrologists. Spurious's plan? Steal aqueduct water by secretly adjusting their slopes to divert a trickle into the source. Just enough to power wash this dump, he says, kicking a calcified lump that might be a dead rat or a very unlucky falcon. The conspiracy hinges on a quirk of Roman engineering. Aqueducts and sources share elevation maps. By chiseling a hairline crack in the Aqua Claudius channel and tilting its slope a mere 0.07 degrees, you can send a midnight surge into the cloaca. It's genius, if you ignore the part where tampering with imperial infrastructure is punishable by being sewn into a donkey carcass. The first heist goes smoother than a patrician's alabaster cheeks. You wait for the vigils to change shifts, then scramble up a service ladder to the Aqua Claudia. Spurious wedges a chisel into the mortar, levering the channel's lip downward. The water, ever eager to please, licks at the new angle and, yes, a silvery thread peels off into the cloaca below. By dawn, the source flowing cleaner than a vestal's conscience. But Rome's water network is a gossipy old crone. Within days, the Aqua Claudia's engineers notice their precious flow has dipped. Evaporation, they declare, squinting at the sky. Or, thirsty ghosts. You and Spurious exchange grins over a lunch of hard-boiled eggs, the cloaca's unofficial currency. The sabotage becomes ritual. Every nones, you hit a new aqueduct. The Annio Novus, the Aqua Marcia, even Emperor Claudius's vanity project, the Aqua Imaginarius, which mostly waters his peacock topiary. The source gleam. Senators marvel at the lack of ambient aroma. And you? You're the phantom of the fucking Forica, baby. Then comes the Ides of July. Spurious gets greedy. Just a little more tilt, he insists, jimmying the Aqua Appia's channel with a crowbar. The diverted surge isn't a trickle, it's a torrent. The cloaca chokes. Bricks rattle. Somewhere, a latrine priest's ceremonial sponge is swept out to sea. Chaos erupts at both ends. The Aqua Appia's engineers panic as their channel runs dry, while the cloaca vomits its newfound wealth into the Tiber, flooding riverside markets with, let's call it organic confetti. A fishmonger's stall becomes an impromptu spa. Senators slip on algae. The Senate, finally smelling something fishier than the fish, launches an inquiry. Enter Frontinus, Rome's newly appointed water commissioner and human lie detector. He stalks the Aqua Appia with a dioptra, muttering equations that make slaves faint. This slope has been altered, he growls. By amateurs. You're sweating harder than a gladiator in wool underpants when he inspects the cloaca. But Frontinus, ever the pragmatist, pauses at the gleaming bricks. Hem, he says. Cleaner than my grandmother's silver. The showdown happens in the Tullianum dungeon, where Frontinus interrogates sore crews with the warmth of a winter in Germania. Confess, he says, dangling a wax tablet over a rat-filled pit. Or I recalculate Rome's sewage tax retroactively. Spurious cracks first. We did it for the smell, he wails. Frontinus's eyebrow arches higher than the Aqua Claudia. The Senate's verdict? A cover-up. Admitting the cloaca crew outsmarted Rome's finest would be like Nero confessing he can't sing. Instead, they blame slope drift from cosmic winds and commission a statue of Jupiter Pluvius, with a suspiciously saw-shaped lightning bolt. Historians still argue whether the conspiracy was real or a satirist's fever dream. The evidence? A 2nd century graffiti near the cloaca reading Aqua Surrepute, Water Heist, and Frontinus's diaries, where he scribbles, "Why does the cloaca smell like roses every nose?" As for you? Transferred to the Aqueducts, irony's favorite toy. Now you're the one glaring at slope calculations, jumping at every midnight splash. Sometimes, walking the Claudia, you spot a familiar crack, a smudge of mortar. You smile. The cloaca's still clean. Section 12. The year 154 BC dawns hotter than Vulcan's forge, and Rome's throats are drier than a mummy's cough. You're standing in the shadow of the Aqua Marsh's arches, or what's left of them. The channel, once a roaring artery of mountain fresh aqua, now gapes like a parched mouth, its stones bleached bone white under the relentless sun. A lone lizard skitters across the empty bed, pausing to glare at you as if to say, "Really?" The Aqua Marsh's demise isn't a tragedy, it's a farce. 3 months into the drought, engineers have resorted to scraping dew off temple roofs and bribing Nile merchants for emergency humidity. The public baths? Reduced to communal sweat lodges. Senators shuffle through the forum clutching sponges soaked in vinegar, their togas crusted with salt from evaporated tears. Even the Tiber's fish are staging a migration protest. The blame game begins at the Senate's emergency session, held in the Temple of Jupiter because the curious too stuffy and smells like despair. Engineer-in-Chief Marcus Hydrus, a man whose forehead permanently glistens with stress sweat, unrolls a scroll of damning evidence. Budget ledgers slashed to ribbons, supply orders marked denied, in ink so red it could have been drawn from a gladiator's wound. You gave us half the lime, a quarter the slaves, and he brandishes a rusty pickaxe, tools last used by Romulus. The Senate's retort? A collective shrug wrapped in piety. Senator Decimus Crassus rises, his toga strategically stained with wine to imply divine inspiration. The river gods are lazy, he declares. Neptune naps. Tiberinus vacations in Sicilian spas. Why blame mortal thrift? The chamber erupts in applause. A junior senator releases doves in a symbolic plea for rain. They immediately crash into a dry fountain. You, meanwhile, are knee-deep in the marsh's silt, sifting for clues. The answer's obvious to anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together. The Aqueduct's main spring was tapped out after the Senate diverted funds to gild Calpurnius Piso's new yacht, the liquid asset. But try telling that to the mob chanting Aqua, Aqua, outside the baths. Historians still argue whether the drought was natural or man-made. Tree rings suggest a dry cycle, scrolls suggest idiocy. But here's the kicker. The engineer's secret report, buried under a mountain of bureaucratic chaff, blames substandard mortar and senatorial cheapness. The Senate's counter-report, etched on gold leaf, blames an overabundance of toga starch clogging divine favor. Desperation births innovation. You join a midnight expedition to the shrine of Egeria, water nymph and Rome's last hope. The ritual involves tossing honey cakes into a dry spring while chanting, "Hydrate us, O moist one." It goes poorly. A novice priest misreads the script and accidentally summons a badger. The plebs, ever pragmatic, take matters into their own hands. A gang of laundresses, their tunics crisp as parchment, storm the Janiculum reservoir with buckets. They're met by engineers armed with grommet and gilt. "Please," you beg, blocking the sluice gate. "Steal after siesta." The Senate's final solution? A grand procession to the Tiber, where Crassus lobs a solid gold urn into the river as a stimulus package for the gods. It sinks without a ripple. "See," he beams. Generosity begets. A mud-caked child chucks a rotten fig at his head. The crowd riots. In the chaos, you spot a glimmer of hope or madness. An Etruscan dowser named Lathia claims she can find water using a forked willow branch and vibes. Skeptical but thirsty, you trail her to the field of Mars. Her stick twitches over a patch of crabgrass. "Dig here," she insists. You do. 10 feet down, you strike a septic tank. The drought breaks not with rain, but with a backroom deal. The Senate, fearing an encore of the Great Saw heist, still the talk of every taberna, greenlights the Aqua, a thermal spring project that'll later become Rome's most lukewarm aqueduct. The engineers, too exhausted to protest, draft plans using wine for ink and resignation for fuel. As the first trickle of Tepula's tepid flow enters the city, Crassus christens it a triumph of fiscal prudence. The crowd, too dehydrated to boo, laps it up. You retreat to the cloaca maxima, now nostalgically fragrant, and pour a libation of sour wine onto its bricks. Here's to lazy gods, you toast, and lazier senators. Section 13. You're scrunched under Emperor Claudius's dining couch, nose pressed to marble, when destiny taps you with a grout-covered sandal. "You! Floor tile boy!" The emperor booms, his voice ricocheting off the palace walls like a drunk discus. "Why does this tile," he stomps, "slope smoother than the aqua Claudia?" You blink. The answer's obvious. Claudius's architect, a paranoid Syrian named Lysias, designed the palace floors with a 0.05-degree tilt to keep spilled wine from pooling around the emperor's feet. But before you can explain, Claudius has a revelation that'll bankrupt half the empire. If floors can slope, why not aqueducts? Thus begins the great standardization. At dawn, heralds fan across Rome, trumpeting Decree 34.7b, all aqueduct gradients shall mirror the imperial floor slope, 0.05 degrees plus or minus a hair's width, as measured by the golden tile of divine Claudius, patent pending. Engineers weep into their grome. The golden tile, a 2 by 2 foot slab of Numidian marble, isn't just a measurement tool, it's a mood. Lysias, now head of the Aqueduct Alignment Bureau, carries it in a velvet-lined litter, barking at workers to kiss the tile for calibration. The first victim? The Aqua Virgo, halfway through construction. You're ordered to rip up 10 miles of channel because its 0.1-degree slope is barbarically steep. Lysias inspects the site, tile in hand, and faints when a breeze ruffles his calibration feather. "The wind altered the angle," he shrieks. Workers spend days building a linen tent around the aqueduct, only for a moth to sneeze and shift the tile. Meanwhile, provinces hemorrhage denarii. In Hispania, engineers discover their local slope is 0.07 degrees, gasp, so they dismantle an entire bridge to reharmonize with the imperial vibes. Gaul's governor, already bankrupt from shipping 500 tons of slope-compliant limestone, sends a tersely worded scroll, "Claudius's tile can kiss my Belgic ass." It's filed under foreign poetry. But the true tragedy unfolds in Sicily. The island's aqueduct, painstakingly carved into Mount Etna's slope, is declared geologically heretical for its 0.03-degree incline. The engineer in charge, a stoic named Appius, refuses to rebuild. Lysias's response? A fleet of barges hauling Sicilian marble back to Rome, to repave Claudius's other palace, where the floors are mysteriously 0.06 degrees off. Historians still argue whether Claudius's madness was a power flex or early onset OCD. The quirky twist? The golden tile slope wasn't even intentional. Lysias later confesses, on his deathbed, via burp, that he tripped while laying the palace floor, spilling a jug of wine that warped the tiles. Claudius, ever the scholar, declares this divine spillage, and adds it to the imperial crest. By year's end, 3 provinces are bankrupt, Egypt's granaries are trading slope calculations for grain, and Claudius hosts a banquet where guests slide their plates down the table for optimal drainage. You're stuck hauling the golden tile to the German frontier, where engineers are debating whether barbarian villages need civilized hydration. A chieftain eyes the tile, grunts, and uses it to crush walnuts. As you trudge back to Rome, a street vendor sells golden tile honey cakes, slightly tilted, of course. You bite into one, savoring the sticky irony. Somewhere, Claudius slips on his perfect floor, splashes into a puddle of his own divine design, and blames the Gauls. Section 14. The year is 52 BC, and you're crouched in a smoky Roman workshop that smells like a volcano's armpit, watching a metalsmith named Ferrus pour molten lead into sand molds. Forget gradients, he grins, holding up a freshly cast pipe. This is the future. The pipe gleams like a malevolent snake, it seems sealed with a mix of pride and desperation. Outside, the Aqua Anios engineers are in their 15th hour of debating a 0.08-degree slope. Inside, you're about to cheat. Lead piping is Rome's worst-kept secret. The metal's malleable, easy to hammer around corners, and, bonus, makes water taste sweet. Never mind that the Greek physician Dioscorides wrote about lead's toxic vapors. Romans would drink battery acid if it paired well with oysters. Ferrus's pitch is irresistible. Pressurized pipes don't need slopes. Stick 'em anywhere. You imagine bypassing the Senate's gradient gridlock, threading water through alleys and attics like a liquid thread. Genius. Or homicide. The first test run is a raucous affair. You install lead pipes along the Vicus Tuscus, bypassing a 300-yard aqueduct bend. Ferrus christens the system with a jug of Falernian wine, lead-aged, naturally. The moment the valve opens, water rockets through the pipe with a shriek that sends pigeons fleeing the forum. A baker's stall is drenched. A senator's mistress gets an impromptu shower. Everyone cheers. Beats waiting for gravity. Ferrus whoops, ignoring the puddle of vomit from a slave who licked the pipe. But triumph curdles faster than milk in July. By the next full moon, the Vicus Tuscus's residents develop a shared twitch. The baker forgets his own name. The senator's mistress starts reciting Etruscan prophecies. Even Ferrus complains of mornings that taste like a struck gong. You dismiss it as bad wine, until a plumber's apprentice named Gaius keels over mid-sodder, foaming like a poorly tapped keg. It's the pipes, hisses a midwife named Livia, who's delivered enough stillborns this month to fund a tombstone shop. She drags you to a fountain where the lead pipe's joint has sprouted a blue-green crust. The water's poisoned. You scoff. But it's delicious poisoned. She throws a jug at your head. Historians still argue whether lead pipes toppled the empire or just made everyone weird. The mainstream fact? Romans consumed up to 250 micrograms of lead daily, 5 times modern safety limits. The quirky tidbit? Wealthy households used lead-lined pots to sweeten wine, creating a neurotoxic vintage called Sapa. Tastes like victory, declared one consul shortly before forgetting his children's names. You confront Ferrus, now sporting a tremor that makes him pour lead like a sprinkler. We need to stop, you plead. He waves you off, slurring, nonsense. My pipes are, blessed by Vulcan. Behind him, a wall scroll lists his achievements: 5 miles of lead piping, 3 poisoned wells, and a lawsuit from a fishmonger whose stock now glows. The Senate's response? A 10-page edict written, irony alert, on lead tablets. The pipes shall remain, it declares, as they align with the divine Roman spirit of innovation. Translation: too many bribes invested in lead mines. By year's end, the city's a mosaic of madness. Lawyers argue cases backward. Priests sacrifice left-handed sheep. And you? You're hawking lead detox tonics, 90% honey, 10% lies, at the Circus Maximus. Your sales pitch? Forget the aqueducts, save your brain. Customers sip, smile vacantly, and wander into walls. The final straw comes when Emperor Nero, yes, that Nero, demands lead pipes for his golden house. "I want my baths to sparkle," he trills, plucking a lyre strung with lead wire. You consider fleeing to Germania, but Ferrus intercepts you with a desperate grin. "One last job." He reveals a pipe network feeding Nero's private reservoir. "We'll be heroes." You're too tired to argue. The night before the grand opening, you crouch in Nero's crawl space, adjusting a lead joint. A drop of water beads at the seam. You taste it, sweet, metallic, wrong. Somewhere, a lyre screeches. Somewhere else, a midwife weeps. You pocket the wrench and walk. Let history handle the rest. Centuries later, archaeologists will sift through Roman ruins and wonder, how'd they miss the lead? Answer: they were too busy arguing over slopes. Modern scholars debate whether Lee's slow creep of dementia eroded the empire's judgment, or just made their poetry funnier. Either way, your legacy trickles on, a whisper in modern pipes, a cautionary tale in every chemistry class, and a street vendor in Naples selling authentic Roman lead water to tourists with poor life choices. As dawn breaks, you pass Ferrus's workshop. His singing to a lead pipe, convinced it's his mother. The pipe, ever silent, glints in the sun. Some cheat codes cost too much. Section 15. The year is 60 CE, and you're squinting at a Greek instruction manual that might as well be written in chicken scratches. Hero of Alexandria's dioptra, a brass and ivory gadget that looks like a cross between a sundial and a drunk centurion's helmet, sits before you, smugly reflecting sunlight into your eyes. Precision measurement. The merchant had crowed, swearing this astral marvel would end slope debates forever. What he failed to mention? To calibrate the damn thing, you need to understand the zodiac. You're in a moonlit field outside Rome, surrounded by engineers debating whether Gemini is a constellation or a type of shellfish. The dioptra's manual, translated by a poet who clearly hated engineers, insists that proper alignment requires the harmony of Perseus's sword and Aquarius's urn. Your colleague, a grizzled surveyor named Cassius, kicks the device. "I'll give it harmony," he growls. Hero's dioptra is, in theory, revolutionary. Its geared discs measure angles to the nearest 0.01 degree. Its sighting tubes can pinpoint a gnat's eyebrow at 100 paces. But the catch? Every measurement must be cross-referenced with celestial charts to balance terrestrial and cosmic energies. Translation: you can't plot a slope until you've calculated Jupiter's position in relation to your aunt's birthday. The first test run is a fiasco. You're mapping the Aqua Claudia's extension when Cassius, tasked with star checking, misreads Lyra as Libra. The dioptra spins like a dervish, its pointer arm lurching toward a sheep pasture. According to this, you mutter, the optimal slope is -4 degrees. The water'll flow uphill. Cassius shrugs. Maybe the sheep are magical. Word spreads. Engineers flock to the dioptra like moths to a cursed flame. Some embrace the astrological hoopla, wearing philosopher beards and muttering about stellar alignment. Most just wing it. One team uses the device to measure the slope of the Circus Maximus's tracks, accidentally inventing Rome's first roulette wheel. Another, convinced cosmic energy means moonlight, works only at night, until a praetor mistakes them for cat burglars and unleashes the guard dogs. Historians still argue whether Hero's astrological requirements were genuine or a mistranslation of seasonal adjustments. The mainstream fact? Hero was a genius who pioneered pneumatics and automatons. The quirky tidbit? His original manual included a star chart later revealed to be a map of his favorite Alexandria taverns, with Sirius marked as the one with cheap oysters. Your breaking point comes at the Aqua Anio's repair site. The foreman, a no-nonsense brute named Magnus, demands a 0.2 degree slope. You spend hours aligning the dioptra with Orion's belt, only for clouds to roll in. Magnus, tapping his foot, snaps. Just eyeball it. You do. The restored channel works perfectly. The dioptra, sensing betrayal, jams its gears. Rumors swirl. Some claim the device only works for engineers born under Taurus. Others whisper that Hero cursed it to spite Romans. The Senate, ever eager to waste money, commissions a gold-plated dioptra blessed by the College of Augurs. It debuts at the Pantheon, where the head priest declares, Mercury's retrograde forbids calibration until spring. The crowd boos. A plumber in the back yells, use a Chorobates, and starts a chant. By decade's end, most dioptras gather dust in storerooms or become fancy paperweights. You spot one reproposed as a wine pourer in a Pompeii tavern, its sighting tube dribbling Falernian. Cassius, now retired, breeds mules and claims they're better at astrology. The final insult? A Greek merchant offloads a shipment of dioptras to the Druids, who use them as ritual salad tossers. Yet the dioptra's legacy lingers. Decades later, Frontinus will cite it in De Aquis as a lesson in overcomplication. In Alexandria, Hero's disciples argue that Romans were too barbaric to grasp celestial mechanics. And in your nightmares, you still hear the click-clack of its gears, mocking you with every misaligned star. As you pack up the dioptra for the last time, a junior engineer asks, what if we ignored the stars and just used math? You consider the idea revolutionary in its simplicity, then toss him the manual. Don't upset Hero. He's probably watching. Above, a shooting star streaks, or maybe it's just a drunk dropping a lamp from the Aqua Claudia. Section 16. You're knee-deep in scrolls that reek of lamp oil and existential dread, trapped in Frontinus's idea of a productivator. Historians still argue whether Frontinus wrote it all himself or just plagiarized the screams of his soul. You're tasked with auditing the Aqua Claudia's records. Frontinus wants precision, not poetry. But the ledgers are a nightmare. One scribe measured slopes in olive pits per stadium. Another noted, water flow, sufficient, maybe. You present your findings. Frontinus's eye twitches. Sufficient maybe? Was he raised by wolves? He storms off to personally remeasure the Annio Novus with a dioptra his named Vindicta. By dawn, you're hallucinating numbers. A stray drop of ink becomes a 0.07 degree slope. A moth circling the lamp morphs into a tiny, screaming engineer. Frontinus returns, covered in mud and triumph. The Annio slope was off by 0.003 degrees, he crows. I realigned it using my teeth. You don't ask. The Senate, fearing Frontinus's wrath more than Carthage, mandates his manual as required reading. Engineers rebel. Scrolls are lost in latrines, used as kindling, or repurposed as blankets for chilly slaves. Frontinus retaliates by stationing veterans at aqueduct sites to quiz crews. What's the minimum gradient for a speakus? One growls, sword pointed at a mason's sandal. The answer, per page 762, 0.15 degrees, you heathen. Historians still debate whether Frontinus ever slept. Evidence? His diary entry from 97C, slept 3 hours. Dreamt of slopes. Woke up angry. The man dies mid-tirade, quill in hand, correcting a junior's report. His tombstone reads, he measured in hell now. As you burn midnight oil rewriting his manual, again, a mouse drags off page 347. You let it. Somewhere, Frontinus screams into the void. Section 17. The year is 846 CE, and you're shivering in a scriptorium so cold, your breath hangs in the air like a ghostly footnote. Brother Alcuin of Tours, a monk whose eyebrows have merged into a single hedge of piety, thrusts a crumbling parchment under your nose. "Behold," he whispers, as if the mice might steal his revelation. "The digit is not a measurement, it's a miracle." The parchment in question is a water-stained copy of Frontinus's De Aquis, salvaged from a looted Roman villa and mislabeled De Divinis Digitibus, on divine fingers, by a dyslexic scribe. Over centuries, monks have scribbled marginalia transforming Vitruvius's engineering jargon into mystical allegories. A diagram of a Chorobates is now labeled St. Joseph's level, and a note about slope gradients reads, "Thus spake the Lord, let the waters ascend the mount." You've been summoned to fix the cathedral aqueduct, a lopsided trough snaking up a hill behind the monastery. Brother Alcuin believes it's channeling holy hydraulics to baptize the abbey's new relic, a toe bone of St. Hydrantius, patron of questionable plumbing. The problem? The aqueduct's inverted. Instead of descending to deliver water, it climbs the slope, powered by prayers and the occasional bucket brigade of novices. It's a divine gradient, Alcuin insists, pointing to a fresco of Moses whacking a rock. If the Jordan can flow uphill for Christ's baptism, why not our aqueduct? You explain gravity. He counters with a hymn. The aqueduct is a Frankenstein of salvaged Roman bricks, Frankish timber, and a repurposed sarcophagus. Monks chant psalms while hammering pegs into mortarless joints. The channel's slope, measured not in degrees but angels' breaths per psalm, tilts upward at a 2-degree angle. At the base, a spring dribbles into the trough. The water sloshes forward a hand's width, hesitates, then slides back like a sinner at confession. Needs more faith, Alcuin declares, ordering a midnight vigil. Monks circle the aqueduct, swinging censers of incense so thick, the sight resembles a dragon's den. A novice tosses a handful of St. Hydrantius's bone dust into the channel. The water inches forward, bubbles mysteriously, and stops. "A sign!" the monks cry. You cough, it's the incense. Historians still argue whether medieval engineers genuinely misunderstood Roman texts or just prioritized symbolism over function. The mainstream fact? Carolingian monasteries did repurpose Roman aqueduct fragments, often botching the math. The quirky twist? Some mistook libella, a level, for libellus, a prayer book, leading to tools displayed on altars. Your pragmatic solution, dig a downhill trench, is heresy. You defy God's will. Alcuin gasps, clutching his crucifix. You argue that even Noah's Ark had a drain. He excommunicates you from the project, then begs you to stay, since you're the only one who knows how to unclog the sarcophagus segment. By Lent, the aqueduct's a local attraction. Peasants' pilgrimage to see the river that flows heavenward. A blind bard composes an epic, the Ballad of Backward Waters, which becomes a hit at taverns where meat trumps physics. The bishop, sensing profit, sells vials of aqueduct holy water that's 90% moss. Disaster strikes on Easter. A downpour floods the inverted channel, sending a torrent down the slope, the way gravity intended. The surge smashes through the monastery cellar, baptizing 50 barrels of communion wine. Monks scramble to save the casks, shouting, "The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away, but mostly taketh." Alcuin, ever the spin doctor, declares the flood a miracle. See how the waters leapt to cleanse our sins, and inventory. The bishop, tipsy on salvaged sacramental wine, agrees. You're paid in a relic, a rusty Roman grommer spike labeled Holy Nail of Anch. Centuries later, archaeologists will find the aqueduct's remains and debate if it was a liturgical art piece or a prank. The truth? It's both. As you ride home, a peasant boy stops you, holding a wooden toy aqueduct. "Make it go up," he pleads. You flip the toy. He gasps, eyes wide. "Magic!" You don't correct him. Let the future fret over angles. For now, faith flows where logic won't. Section 18. You're hunched over a walnut desk in a Florentine bottega, 1503 CE, where sunlight slices through dust motes like God's own protractor. The air reeks of vinegar, for ink fixing, and Leonardo da Vinci's simmering frustration. He's just slammed a moldy codex of frontinus onto the table, sending a dried beetle carcass skittering into your lap. Questo maledetto Gaius, he snarls, jabbing at a marginalia sketch in the margin, a doodle of the Aqua Claudius slope, annotated by some long-dead Roman in turn named Gaius. How does his math still outpace mine? The sketch in question is a relic looted from a Venetian tomb, its edges nibbled by rats and 15th century mediocrity. Gaius's scroll, gradiens hic 0.2 degrees sine non, cloaca erit, slope here 0.2 degrees or it becomes a saw, mocks Leonardo from beyond the grave. 4 weeks, he's been reverse engineering Rome's aqueducts, convinced he can outwit a ghost. His workshop walls are papered with feverish sketches, spiral siphons, inverted weirs, a pump powered by oxen hooves. None work. Observe, Leonardo growls, flinging open his latest notebook. Page after page shows the Aqua Claudia redrawn with gears, pulleys, and one perplexing addition, winged cherubs blowing water uphill. I've recalculated Gaius's slope using modern principles, he declares, pointing to a triangle labeled La Rabbia di Dio, the wrath of God. The numbers are elegant, the geometry flawless, and entirely incompatible with gravity. You tactfully suggest testing the design. Leonardo's eyes narrow. Testa? He spits the word like a rotten olive. Why test when you can their eyes? Nevertheless, he drags you to the Arno's banks, where apprentices haul a scale model of his Vitruvian aqueduct, a wooden monstrosity with a helical channel and a sailcloth reservoir. Behold, he crows, releasing a bucket of water. It swirls down the corkscrew, gains speed, and rockets off the end, drenching a laundrywoman. Meraviglioso! Leonardo cheers, sketching the splash pattern. Note the parabolic vigor. The laundrywoman throws a sodden tunic at his head. Back in the workshop, Leonardo mutters over Gaius's notes. He used pulvis, volcanic sand? Pa! He scribbles out a new equation, the quill tearing the parchment. If only I could speak to him, a crash interrupts. A shelf of clay tablets has toppled, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, Gaius's long-lost field quirky tidbit? He once proposed training otters to unclog pipes. By midnight, Leonardo's cracked. His redrawn Gaius's Aqua Claudia with a 0.19 degree slope, just to one-up him by 0.01. Take that, you dead idiota, he whispers, then promptly falls asleep on the codex. In the margin, unseen, his doodled Gaius as a cherub dropping a plumb line into hell. Section 19. The year is 1997, and you're standing in a Massachusetts field that's 1 part engineering marvel, 3 parts academic hubris. The MIT Hydraulic Society, a club of over-caffeinated undergrads who've never met a problem they couldn't overcomplicate, has vowed to out-Rome Rome by building a perfect replica aqueduct. Their weapon of choice? A $20,000 grant, a warehouse of 3D printed pozzolana mortar, and a towering arrogance that could have made Caesar blush. We've optimized every variable, declares Chad, the team lead, adjusting his Romans Iunt Domus t-shirt. Even the Romans didn't have computational fluid dynamics. The project is a fever dream of anachronisms. Students haul limestone blocks in a rented forklift labeled Modern Slave. A GPS drone maps the trench route, which suspiciously avoids a Starbucks. The pièce de résistance? A laser-guided Chorobates that live-streams slope data to a Discord channel. We're honoring tradition, Chad insists, while chugging a Red Bull, but elevating it. The only thing elevated here is the risk of a nervous breakdown. The fatal flaw reveals itself at 3 a.m. on build day. You're reviewing the plans when you spot it, All measurements are in metric. Chad, you interrupt, waving a conversion chart. The Romans used Roman feet. Your 0.2 degree slope is actually 0.197 degrees in their units. That's a 1.5% error. He cuts you off with a glare only achievable by someone who's mainlined espresso for 72 hours. Metric is objectively superior, he snaps. Besides, decimals are literally why we invented computers. The team nods, their trust in Silicon Valley as unshakable as their ignorance of history. Construction begins with a ceremonial toga party. Frat bros in bedsheets mix mortar while debating whether Gladiator is a documentary. The laser Chorobates beams approval, 0.2 degrees exactly, as water tumbles through the channel. For 5 glorious minutes, it works. Then a tremor rattles the ground. Or is it just Chad's knees? The aqueduct shudders, cracks zigzagging like a meme stock graph, and collapses into a heap of limestone and shattered dignity. A brick crushes a laptop playing SPQR, the podcast. The aftermath is a masterclass in schadenfreude. Professors facepalm. Reddit threads erupt, tell Romans owned imperial units and engineers who could do math. The dean issues a statement blaming unforeseen variables, read, hubris. Chad, now the star of MIT's unofficial fail compilation V, transfers to philosophy. Historians still argue whether the collapse was truly due to metric hubris or the fact that the team used Portland cement labeled Roman style. The quirky twist? The rubble becomes a cult hotspot. Engineering tourists pilgrimage to the site, leaving offerings of protractors and Skyrim copies. A local brewer turns the intact base into a Roman-themed beer cooler, advertising Aqueduct chilled IPAs, just like Caesar drank. As you sift through the wreckage, a freshman tugs your sleeve. But why didn't metric work? You hand them a tape measure. Same reason you can't fit a Ferrari engine in a chariot. The past doesn't care about your decimals. That night, Chad's laser Chorobates resurfaces on eBay. The listing title? Rare Roman artifact, slightly used. Section 20. The year is 165 CE, and you're seated in Rome's finest latrine, a marble-clad social hub where senators, merchants, and one very lost goat gather to ponder life's currents. The air hums with gossip, the occasional splash, and the rhythmic scrape of sponges on sticks. Beside you, an engineer named Lucius Papirius Balbus unrolls a scroll across his knees, squinting at calculations in the flickering lamplight. "Hear me out," he says, waving a stylus like a scepter. "If we adjust the aqua Triana's slope here," he jabs at a smudged diagram, "we'll save 10% on sediment removal. Also, pass the vinegar." The scroll in question isn't papyrus. It's a spongier receipt from last week's oyster binge, repurposed as a hydraulic blueprint. Welcome to the golden age of multitasking. Roman latrines aren't just for waste management, they're linked in for plumbers. Engineers hash out aqueduct specs here because, as Balbus puts it, the acoustics are perfect for echo calculations. Also, no one escapes until the job's done. Your mission today: troubleshoot the Aqua Claudia's sluggish flow. Balbus suspects a gradient flaw in the speaker's channel, but the Senate's too cheap to fund a survey. So here you are, crunching numbers on a wax tablet that seem more cacatum than a Pompeian alleyway. Across the bench, a tax collector named Decimus chimes in. Why not use the cloaca maxima as a backup? It's already a saw, just add wine. The crowd groans. Decimus has been pushing this idea since the reign of Hadrian. The breakthrough comes mid-Sturcus. Balbus, inspired by the natural flow of the latrine's central channel, sketches a slope adjustment using wine dregs as ink. 0.1 degrees steeper, he declares, as a slave tops up his cup. It'll flush out debris like a praetor's conscience. The table cheers. A scribe transcribes the plan onto a scroll, later archived as de aqua et sina, on water and dinner, complete with a doodle of Neptune riding a chamber pot. Fast forward 1,800 years. Archaeologists in Ostia Antiqa uncover a septic tank filled with spongia sticks and a clay jar labeled Cacatore's aquarum, water poopers. Inside, 50 scrolls of calculus, poetry, and grocery lists. One reads, "Fixed slope at mile 7, also, by Garum." Another, penned in a shaky hand, 0.15 degrees or bust, signed, Balbus's hemorrhoids. Historians still argue whether these latrine ledgers were serious engineering records or just drunk doodles. Mainstream fact? Roman engineers did work in public latrines, social hubs where deals flowed faster than the aqueducts. Quirky tidbit? The scrolls also contain Rome's earliest known Yelp reviews: avoid Vitellius's vomitorium, lukewarm peacock, and suspicious gradient. The scholarly debate peaks at the 2021 Rome Hydraulic Symposium, where two professors nearly brawl over a scroll fragment. "It's a mensor's field manual," insists Dr. Livius, brandishing a photo of a diagram. "No," retorts Dr. Galla, "it's a love letter to a labrum bath basin. See the heart around 0.2 degree? The crowd votes to split the difference, ancient plumbing porn. Back in antiquity, Balbus's slope fix works, sort of. The aqua Claudius flow improves until a disgruntled apprentice, angry over a latrine graffiti contest loss, sabotages the channel with a stolen sponge stick. The Senate blames bad humors and sacrifices a goat to Cloacina, goddess of sores. The goat, unimpressed, chews through Balbus's scroll. As you exit the latrine, a street vendor hawks aqueduct calculation kits, wax tablets pre-scratched with slope formulas. You buy one as a gag gift for Decimus. He'll need it. Tomorrow's agenda: convincing the Senate that lead pipes are the future. Spoiler, they're not. Centuries later, tourists peering at the latrine ruins will chuckle, "They did math here." Yes, Karen. While you Instagram toilet selfies, Romans Instagrammed hydraulics. The grind never changes, only the plumbing. Section 21. The year is 2021, and you're squinting at a screen displaying what looks like a cosmic Rorschach test: charred papyrus scrolls from Herculaneum, scanned by a particle accelerator so advanced, it probably dreams in quantum physics. The lab reeks of burnt espresso and the existential dread of academics who've spent 6 hours debating whether a pixelated smudge is Greek letters or mold. "There," yells Dr. Claudia Schmidt, a papyrologist with a caffeine tremor strong enough to power the Large Hadron Collider. Between the Plato quote and the grocery list, that's the slope formula. The scroll in question survived Vesuvius's tantrum by baking into a carbonized burrito. For centuries, it sat in a Naples museum labeled unreadable, probably boring. Now, thanks to X-ray phase contrast tomography, a phrase that costs $50,000 to say, you're staring at the holy grail of Roman engineering, a 0.07 degree slope calculation scribbled beside a shopping list for garum, lentils, and one new stylus, not the squeaky kind. The formula's elegance is undeniable, a cascade of Greek symbols and fractions that would make Pythagoras weep. The lentils? A reminder that even geniuses need fiber. "It's the perfect gradient," Claudia whispers, as if the ghost of Vitruvius might overhear and patent it. According to the scroll, this 0.07 degree slope balanced speed and stability so precisely, it could have made the Aqua Augusta flow like silk. But why is it lost to history? The answer lies in the margin, where the author doodled a stick figure fighting a crab and wrote, "Tried it. Senate said no. Bastards." The academic world implodes. Engineers swarm Zoom calls, arguing whether 0.07 was a revolutionary breakthrough or a drunk intern's typo. A TikTok influencer stitches the scroll image with a viral sound: "Roman engineers inventing optimal slopes while I can't even parallel park." Reddit threads dissect the garum brand. Was it Lucius's premium fish gut blend? Meanwhile, you're stuck in a Naples cafe, translating the scroll's footnotes while a barista blasts Bella Ciao at brain-melting decibels. Historians still argue whether the formula was suppressed by jealous bureaucrats or lost because someone spilled garum on the only copy. Mainstream fact? Herculaneum scrolls have revealed everything from Epicurean philosophy to ancient grocery lists. Quirky tidbit? The same scroll includes a 1-star Yelp review for a Pompeian plumber. Unclogged my latrine but stole my figure's 0.07 stars. Your eureka moment comes at 3 a.m., fueled by a panic-induced gelato binge. The 0.07-degree slope wasn't just math, it was compromise. The scribe, one Gaius Vers, not that Vers, probably, calculated it to bypass a senator's villa after the original route was vetoed for blocking the view of my prize peacocks. The formula was Rome's version of duct-taping bureaucracy. But the Senate, ever penny-pinching, rejected it as too innovative. Gaius's revenge? Burying the formula next to a rant about overpriced lentils. Classic disgruntled employee energy. The modern replication attempt is a circus. MIT Nerds 3D print a mini aqueduct based on the scroll, live streaming to 500,000 viewers. It works flawlessly until their authentic Roman garum, fermented in a dorm fridge, leaks, summoning a seagull apocalypse. The feed cuts to a grad student screaming, "The formula wasn't the problem, the garum was." By dawn, the discovery's bastardized by pop culture. A Netflix docudrama, The 0.07 Conspiracy, casts a shirtless Gaius, played by a Marvel dropout, brooding over aqueducts and yelling, "The slope is truth." Historians tweet snarky corrections. You sell the movie rights to fund your next dig, mentally earmarking the cash for a garum-free vacation. As you pack the scroll replica into a climate-controlled vault, Claudia mutters, imagine if they'd listened to Gaius. The empire might have lasted another millennium. You hand her a stress ball shaped like Vesuvius. Nah, they'd have just built a slope to nowhere. Centuries from now, scholars will still debate Gaius's 0.07. Was it genius? A joke? A grocery list accident? The truth? Some secrets sink into ash, some float on garum. But in a lab in Naples, you've pinned one to the light, right next to the takeout menu for the cafe downstairs. Section 22. The year is 79 CE, and you're elbow deep in the sweaty, garlic-reeking chaos of Pompeii's Lupina dell'Acqua, a tavern where the wine is sour, the dice are loaded, and the real action isn't gladiators, but aqueducts. 10 sestoses on the Claudia's third arch. Bellows a fishmonger, slapping a coin pouch onto a table stained with ambition and spilled garum. The bookkeeper, a one-eyed Greek named Lysander, scribbles the bet on a wax tablet already groaning under the weight of bad decisions. Done. But if it collapses before the Ides, you owe me a mackerel. Welcome to Rome's most niche gambling scene, aqueduct failure pools. With Vesuvius grumbling in the distance and half the empire's waterworks held together by spit and hubris, betting on which channel will crumble next is the sport of the masses. The rules? Simple. Pick an aqueduct section, predict its collapse date, and pray to whatever god hasn't yet blocked you for spam offerings. The twist? Some gamblers aren't leaving it to chance. It's all about the goats, whispers Velusia, a priestess-turned-fixer who's sipping wine from a cup shaped like Neptune's trident. She nods to a group of men sneaking a bleating kid into the alley. Sacrifice to Egeria at the right mile marker, and poof, sudden sinkhole. You raise an eyebrow. That's not how hydraulics work. She smirks. And you're not how smart people look. Watch. The next morning, the Aqua Augusta's 4th mile arch gives out, flooding a vineyard and drowning a senator's prized truffle pigs. Lysander's tavern erupts in cheers and groans as payouts are calculated in wine and regrets. Volusia pockets a hefty bag of denarii, winking at you. Told you. Goats never lie. Historians still argue whether these liquid ludi were widespread or just Pompeian eccentricity. Mainstream fact? Romans bet on everything, from chariot races to the color of the Tiber. Quirky tidbit? Scrolls found in Ostia list odds for aqueduct failures alongside gladiator stats. Claudia Arch 3, 3:1. Retiarius Spiny Marcus, 2:1. Don't bet on Spiny. The scandal erupts when a disgruntled gambler, furious after losing his wife's dowry on the Annio Novus, rats out Volusia's goat squad to the authorities. The trial is held in the Forum, where the prosecution parades a visibly traumatized goat as state's witness. The defense? A hungover lawyer who argues, if the gods wanted the Augusta intact, they'd have better architects. The crowd, sensing drama better than the Colosseum, pelts both sides with olives. Emperor Titus, eager to distract from Vesuvius's ominous smoke, decrees aqueduct gambling UN Roman, then quietly places 500 sesterces on the aqua marsha's collapse. The decree's carved into a marble slab that's later used as a gambling table. Fast forward to 2023, where Las Vegas bookies offer odds on infrastructure failures. 10-1 on the Brooklyn Bridge, 20-1 on Rome's Bunga Bunga aqueduct renovation, crows a neon sign. A tourist in a SPQR t-shirt bets $50 on a pothole in Naples. Somewhere, Volusia's ghost high-fives a goat. As you leave Pompeii's ruins, a guide explains how the aqueduct bets funded the city's last brothel expansion. They called it the House of Flowing Fortunes. She winks. You toss a coin into the dry Castellum Aquae. It clatters, echoing through millennia of bad bets and worse engineering. The grind, like gravity, never quits. Section 23. The year is 97 CE, and you're crouched in the shadow of the Aqua Claudia's arches, charcoal stick in hand, composing the greatest work of your career, a limerick about a plumb line. Around you, the aqueduct hums with the sounds of chisels, sloshing water, and engineers muttering hexameters under their breath. There once was a plumb line named Pertinax. You scribble on the stone, whose vertical made engineers vex, a clatter interrupts. A lead weight smashes at your feet, its string dangling like a scorned marionette. Poetry won't fix gradients, Gaius, barks your foreman, his face redder than a boiled lobster. Welcome to Rome's most niche literary movement, aqueduct graffiti as stress relief. The Claudia's walls are a mosaic of verses, doodles, and complaints carved by engineers driven mad by precision. One scroll reads, "O plumb line, cruel mistress of stone, your demands make my back ache and groan. If I tilt you a hair or the Senate will stare, and banish me to dig cloaca alone." Another, more succinct, plumbus delenda estimated. Historians still argue whether these limericks were cathartic art or clandestine code. Mainstream fact? Roman engineers did use plumb lines, perpendicularum, for vertical accuracy. Quirky tidbit? A dig near Ostia uncovered a plumb bob engraved with "Bite Me, Vitruvius," likely a disgruntled apprentice's final act. Your magnum opus today is inspired by a particularly fussy section of the Claudia. The channel slope is flawless, but the supporting arch keeps leaning like a drunk at a symposium. The plumb line, your arch-nemesis, as you've dubbed it in iambic pentameter, exposes every flaw. Why not just paint it straight? Grumbles your colleague Marcus, lobbing an olive pit at the weight. The Senate'll never notice. You point to a nearby inscription, "Marcus tried that." Marcus now mops latrines. The poetry trend started decades earlier, when an engineer named Lucius Scribonius Libo translated his rage over a collapsed arch into a dactylic hexameter so savage, it became a chant at chariot races. Slope too steep, mortar too weak, send the foreman to the creek. Now, every aqueduct crew has a resident bard. Yours is a Gaul named Brennus, who composes elegiac couplets about mortar consistency. His latest, O lime and ash, unite in my hand, lest this arch fall and bury our band. It's no Virgil, but it beats OSHA regulations. The scandal erupts when Senator Publius Vespanius tours the Claudia and mistakes the graffiti for official reports. What's this asterisk plumb line lick stirkus nonsense? He thunders, jabbing at your ode. You panic. Poetic license, Senator. A metaphor for hydraulic resistance. He buys it, commissions an epic poem about his villa's new fountain, and leaves. The crew awards you a laurel wreath woven from rusty iron scraps. But the plumb line's revenge is swift. During the Aqua Triana's inauguration, a freshly carved limerick, here lies the weight that broke our spines, may Hades dunk it in sulphuric wines, catches Emperor Trajan's eye. He laughs so hard, he orders it preserved for posterity. The engineers rejoice, until they are tasked with carving all imperial decrees in rhyme. Centuries later, archaeologists will debate whether these verses were mere jokes or a covert resistance against bureaucratic absurdity. A 2020 paper argues that the limericks contain coded math, 0.2 degrees hidden in syllable counts. A rival scholar counters, no, they are just funny. As you chip your final stanza into the Claudia's base, a novice asks, why waste time on words? You hand him your charcoal. Because, kid, centuries from now, someone will find this and laugh. And maybe, they'll forgive our slope errors. The plumb line sways, indifferent. Somewhere, a poet smiles. Section 24. The year is 122 CE, and you're ankle-deep in the Tiber estuary, your sandals squelching with every step as brine-soaked silt clings to your toes like a needy octopus. Behind you, two engineers, Titus the Torrent and his rival, Lucius Leadfoot Longinus, are locked in a shouting match that's scaring off the seagulls. Saltwater's the future. Titus bellows, waving a jar of murky estuary water like it's nectar of the gods. It's bracing, invigorating, like a plunge into Neptune's armpit. Lucius, whose nickname stems from both his gait and his plumbing choices, snatches the jar and sniffs. This reeks of dead mullet and poor life decisions. He chucks it into the Tiber, where it sinks, foaming ominously. You've ruined the Aqua Triana's intake. Again. The austere incident, as history will clumsily brand it, begins with a feud older than Trajan's column. Titus, a Greek import with a passion for thalassotherapy, saltwater baths, resents Rome's bland, fresh water. Lucius, a traditionalist who thinks even pepper is too spicy, guards the aqueducts like Cerberus at Hades' Gate. Their rivalry peaks when Titus reroutes a branch of the Aqua Triana into the Tiber's salty mouth, flooding suburban baths with enough brine to pickle a legion. It's an improvement, Titus insists, leading a tour of befuddled bathers through the now brackish caldarium. Feel that tingle? That's maritime vitality. A septuagenarian senator bobs in the water, his skin pruned into a topographical map of Gaul. I feel exfoliated, he rasps. And slightly nauseous. Historians still argue whether Titus's sabotage was malice or madness. Mainstream fact? Saltwater infiltration did plague Ostia's aqueducts, often accidentally. Quirky twist? Titus's ledgers reveal purchases of 100 oysters and a deluxe seaweed wrap on the day of the reroute. Coincidence? The Senate thinks not. The backlash is swift. Fishmongers protest as their catch floats belly up in salt-poisoned tanks. Laundrymen hang tunics crusted white as vestal robes. A wine merchant accuses Titus of corrupting the aqua with aqua, which makes sense only after 3 cups of his own stock. The coup de grace? A beloved public fountain, now spewing brine, becomes a shrine for disgruntled cats. Lucius, smelling vindication and dead fish, marches into the baths with a caducea-shaped plumb line. The gradient's off by 0.3 degrees. He crows, as if trigonometry can reverse the tides. You've turned Rome's arteries into soups. Titus, ever the showman, retorts by chugging a goblet of salt water and declaring it the next garum. He vomits magnificently into a drain. The Senate's verdict is a masterclass in bureaucratic absurdity. Titus is fined 5,000 sesterces and sentenced to hydrate exclusively from the cloaca maxima for 1 lunar cycle. Lucius, tasked with fixing the aqueduct, installs a lead filter that removes salt and also oxygen. The baths now smell like a shipwreck's laundry hamper. But the real twist? Demand for saltwater spas skyrockets. Wealthy matrons book marine rejuvenation sessions, convinced brine smooths wrinkles. A poet pens ode to the salty senator, comparing his pruned skin to Venus's own raisins. Titus, pardoned after selling tidal tonics, 90% estuary water, 10% lies, opens a chain of seaside bathhouses. Lucius retires to write a scroll titled Why Saltwater Stupidity Sinks Empires, which becomes a hit as a doorstop. Centuries later, archaeologists sifting through Ostia's ruins will find Titus's oyster shells and Lucius's lead filters, sparking debates over ancient wellness culture. A fresco in Pompeii depicts Neptune facepalming as engineers argue. And in a Naples cafe, a tour guide sips espresso and laughs. Saltwater baths? Classic Romans. They'd put quinoa in their garum if they could. As you wade out of the estuary, a fisherman offers you a jar of suspiciously familiar brine. Titus's secret recipe, he winks. You take a sip, gag, and spit. Tastes like progress. Section 25. The year is 2023, and you're blissfully ignorant beneath a showerhead that's blasting water at a crisp 60 psi, enough pressure to strip wallpaper or awaken existential dread. What you don't know: that every droplet pelting your scalp owes its vigor to a rain-soaked screaming match in 146 BC, and a missing jar of olive oil. Rewind to the height of the Third Punic War. Carthage smolders, Rome's engineers are hungover on victory wine, and 2 aqueduct inspectors named Spurius and Aulus are knee-deep in a mud-slick trench outside Capua. Their task: fix the aqua Capua's pathetic flow before the general's villa runs dry and he sentences them to latrine duty. The problem? The slope's perfect, the channel's clear, but the water moves with the urgency of a snail carrying groceries. It's the pressure, grunts Spurius, wiping rain from his brow. Like trying to drink soup through a straw. Aulus, ever the contrarian, blames misaligned zodiacs and the lack of sacrificial goats. Their argument crescendos until a slave named Tertia, silent until now, mutters, "The olive oil ledger's gone." Cue record scratch. The ledger in question wasn't for salads. Roman engineers used olive oil to coat lead pipes, reducing friction and boosting flow, a trick they'd cribbed from Egyptian perfume traders. But the Capua cruise oil log, detailing how much to pour per mile, had vanished. Rumor says a scribe used it as kindling during a chilly night. Spurious suspects Aulus pawned it for wine. Either way, they are stuck eyeballing lubrication like amateurs. Just dump the whole amphora in. Aulus shouts, appending a jug of oil into the pipe. The result? A geyser erupts from the general's courtyard fountain, baptizing his prized peacock and proving that excessive oil creates too much pressure. The general, impressed by the avian spectacle, declares the mishap innovation and demands all aqueducts replicate it. Thus, Rome's first water pressure standard is born, enough oil to make a bird fly. Historians still argue whether the oil trick was engineering genius or a happy accident. Mainstream fact? Roman lead pipes were sealed with olive oil, though likely in moderation. Quirky twist? The lost ledger resurfaces centuries later in the Vatican archives, misfiled under holy oils, miraculous plumbing. Fast forward to today. Your shower's pressure, regulated by municipal codes and the ghost of Spurius's guesswork, traces back to that Sogri debacle. Modern engineers calculate psi with supercomputers, but the principle remains: move water fast enough to impress a bureaucrat or a peacock. The legacy isn't all glory. In 2019, a plumber in Naples discovers the original ledger wedged behind a Renaissance fresco during a botched Reno. The text, translated via Google Lens, reads, 1 amphora oil per 100 paces. Do not exceed, unless peacocks involved. The EU briefly considers mandating olive oil in PVC pipes, until big olive lobbies for historical accuracy surcharges. As you towel off, blissfully unaware of your debt to Roman chaos, consider this: every time you curse a weak showerhead, somewhere, Spurius and Aulus are haunting a Home Depot, whispering, more oil. The ledger's now a tourist gag. $25 replicas sold at the Roman Aqueduct gift shop, next to I Red Heart hash lead pipes mugs. Scholars weep. Peacocks strut. And in the eternal city, water flows, forever oily. As the last echoes of Roman engineering fade into the hum of your bathroom fan, let the weight of millennia lull you into the realm of dreams. Picture the aqua appia stones, worn smooth by time and water, now resting beneath modern streets like slumbering giants. The chorobates, the lead pipes, the misplaced olive oil, all quiet now, their dramas dissolved into history's gentle current. Tonight, the ghosts of engineers past linger not in grand arches, but in the mundane magic of a turned faucet, the rush of a morning shower, the way your coffee maker gurgles to life. They whisper in the creak of pipes, their debates softened by distance, their triumphs measured in the unremarkable miracle of water arriving where it should, when it should. Scholars may squabble over scrolls, and TikTokers may spin wild theories, but here, in the dark, the truth is simple: every drop carries a story. A story of arrogance and ingenuity, of bribery and toga-clad tantrums, of a civilization that carved rivers into stone and called it progress. So close your eyes, let the fan's white noise wash over you, and imagine Lucius Vibenna, that first surveyor, squinting at a stars long dead, plotting a course you'll finish with the turn of a handle. The stones endure. The water remembers. And somewhere, a peacock shakes off oil, indignant, eternal. Sleep, dear viewer, and dream of gravity's quiet victory. Tomorrow's debates can wait. For now, let the ancients rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.